Oh, thank you for joining us for another episode of Unraveling Success. I am very, very excited today to have a good friend of mine, Dawnyel Smink, on the podcast. Dawnyel is president of CLI and also the Western region of Keystone. And she resides in Mesa, Arizona with her husband, Jason, and their 3 kiddos. In her spare time, I know that Dawnyel enjoys Pilates, golf. She really loves to travel. And Dawnyel has a very special place in her heart for Make-A-Wish. So thank you, Dawnyel, for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me on this, my friend. And so fun to have an opportunity for us to have a conversation on some of the stuff that we talk about all the time.
I know that was one of my thoughts was this is, we could talk all day. And so why don't we, be smart in front of other people?
We're good at that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So let's start out with what your definition of success is.
It's interesting. As I've gotten older, my definition of success has changed. So like I feel like when you're younger, you define it as like financially where are you at, relationship where you're at. And as I've gotten older, I decided that success should not be a totality or a sum, but it should be wrapped up in the small little things that you find wins in your life. So for me, I like to tally the wins of where I'm going, and I put them, and I've talked to you about this, in the buckets of where I try to focus my time and energy, and whether or not I'm putting in more wins in one bucket compared to another, or I'm leaving one totally out. And the one I usually leave out is like doing things for myself, like personally, like feeding my soul. I'll tend to do everything for everybody else, and I'll do a ton for my family, a ton for my career. And so it really helps me get a chance to see, like, overall, where am I finding my wins in my life, and where am I spending my time, and being really, focused on that, and making sure that I don't go empty. Because if you go empty, especially in your me bucket, then the rest of it kind of falls apart too.
It's so true. I think I've talked about this book so many times at this point, but one of the most convicting books that I've read, and it was only in the past 2 years, was Your Oxygen Mask First. And that is all about really specific care in which higher achievers or entrepreneurs need to make sure they're taking of themselves. And it really changed my approach with taking care of myself as a priority, and not just, but taking, like, he really talks about even like spirituality and downtime, time to recharge, time doing things that you enjoy that are like outside of like your, like new adventures and making memories and that type of thing. And yeah, because that was something that was really a struggle for me as well. So
Yeah, because it also used to feel like it was an all or nothing type of thing. So if I wasn't feeling quote unquote success, like professionally or personally, then it was an all or nothing. There wasn't one place or another place that was going really well, right? And it's just a matter of where you put your time and energy into, your goals and where you want to go, and how dedicated and how much you prioritize all of that too. And that you can't be, I don't believe in time management where you're like, your life is balanced.
mm-hmm.
I believe in that you have time focus, and that you have to be good at switching, and you're not good at multitasking. No one is. It's fundamentally impossible to be good at multitasking. So you just got to get better at like switching and being in the moment and being present. So like if you get home and you're with your family and you are not present, you can say you're, by multitasking, by taking texting, and doing work stuff while you're trying to, eat family dinner, then it's not really focused time. So I like to make sure, like, am I in this moment? And am I really paying attention to what this moment should be? And that's always a battle. There's no balance of it. It's like, you just got to switch. And sometimes when you switch, you don't switch well. Like, you just don't, right? You may be more over to this side, and then you're trying to do both. And it doesn't work as efficiently as if when you're in that moment and focused on what it is. And if you can't be in that moment and focused in it, sometimes you got to say, you know what, I need to take a step aside and recalibrate
Yep.
and be able to get back in it again. But that's okay. And just being like, my big word this year has been grace.
Hmm.
Just give yourself grace, because no one's perfect, and those things are very difficult to
It is
navigate.
so true. And that's actually one of my buzzwords that I cannot stand is balance. When someone's like, "Oh, my work-life balance," and I'm like, I just choked a little bit. I hate that. It's such a pressure. And I always I heard an analogy one time where they said in order for anything to move forward, it has to get out of balance. Cuz like you can't walk, right? If you're
Mhm.
walking, you have to pull one foot up to put it forward and you're inherently then out of balance, right? And I just yeah, the
Yep.
great way if I that's ever since then my thought is when someone talks about like work life balance, I always just think stagnation because you can't move forward with it without getting out of balance. You know?
Hmm.
Yeah. So, but yes, those are. Have you ever done? Because what when you've talked about the buckets before and the wins and the buckets, Darren Hardy, is it the planner that he does
Hmm.
the living your best life? Is that
Yep.
where he does? There's that life wheel where he has all the different aspects of your life, and then you have to kind of plot yourself, and so then you see in totality like what your how things look on that wheel. I'm imagining you've done that before. And
Yeah, the Best Year Ever book, I actually have copies of it in my office. So if somebody comes in and they're just like completely stressed, I just go and grab
yes,
one and I hand it to them. And you can utilize that on a daily
yes.
basis. And I've used it before. I like the visualization of the buckets
Mhm.
for me because it's really concrete that I can see. Like, I have it on my mirror, I have it at my work, and I have it places where I'm gonna actually be
Yeah.
sitting. So like, I have it where I'm doing my makeup, right? So it's right there in front of me, and it's like I'm looking at the buckets, and I'm like, okay, really take a good look in the mirror, like literally, like as you're doing that, and check it out and say, okay, which bucket am I really falling short on? His is great, but it's a little more
Yeah,
complex
it took
of
some
it.
time.
It Yeah, it takes some time and to discover what those look like for
Mhm.
you. Mine is just like, where am I spending time in each of, those buckets? So I have my individual bucket, I have my, family bucket, and then I have my
Yeah.
career bucket. So those are the three buckets for me that I'm like, and part of the career is also, charitable
Mhm.
acts in there, part of the career, but it can cross over into your me bucket. Like you talked about Make a Wish, I work on the board, and that fulfills me as
Yeah.
a person too, but it's a part of your career and the work you do. So when I think about career, it isn't just like, we're in the insurance industry. Your career is also like, how do you do work, whether you get paid for it or whether you
Yeah.
volunteer, and how you show up out there in the world in regards to, moving
Yeah.
things forward.
And I think of it like as I've grown in my career, it's almost the measurable is like your impact. What impact are you making?
Mhm.
And that's on a lot of, it can be with a new agency that you're bringing aboard, or it can be with Make a Wish. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So one of the things that we've talked about before is insurance. I feel like the vast, vast majority of people in this industry that I know never planned on getting into insurance. I know I fell into it when I was 20 as a receptionist and at an insurance agency, and I was in nursing school, so it was not the plan. So share a little bit about um, how you happen to get into insurance.
Yeah, so I actually chose it. I was one of those weird people that did choose it. It was I initially was a pre-med student, and I was going to be an OBGYN forever. And then I got pregnant my senior year of college with my first son, and I was like, I need a good mom job. I need to, have a career where I can still be at home and be a mom. And that was my perception of being in my, early 20s and trying to figure out what life is, and then, having a baby. So I decided that my senior year, I would extend it a little bit, have my son, but also get a degree in elementary education. So I taught as a sixth grade teacher for a number of years and realized that really wasn't a fit for me. I had a company that also did events, and we would do the decor for the events, and found that really I loved being an entrepreneur, and that fit who my soul was. And it didn't really feed me to be a teacher, except for it did feed me when I was educating. So you got to look at like, what are your strengths? So when I looked at like, I'm not going to go and teach anymore, and I really did not want to work on the weekends. I got remarried, and my husband's like, he's like, you don't have to have two jobs anymore. You're not a single mom anymore. So you don't have to do that anymore. And I decided that I was either going to go into real estate, I was going to go into mortgages, or I'm going to go into insurance. And I chose insurance for a number of reasons. And the first part of it is that I could be an entrepreneur in this field. And the second thing is that it could have flexibility for my family as well. And it would also allow me to feed my soul in regards to educating about, managing your risk. I mean, that's not something we openly talk about. Like, people avoid it. Like, and I went for a company that went from doing property casualty to adding financial services, and they wanted us to mainly sell life insurance. If you want to see people run away from risk management, talk about if they're going to die, which actually that's a fact. I'm not presenting a risk that is never going to happen. I'm actually going to present a risk that's like inevitable, right? Sure. And still people don't want to talk about it. So it's finding the ways to make insurance fun. And that's been a part of my career since the beginning, is like, how can you make this entertaining? And I guess that's maybe going back to the path that I was on, is that with teaching, I learned how to take concepts and make it really creative and fun for, my students. And then it was a blessing to be able to have that experience, because now I bring it into everything that I do. It's like, okay, we're going to have conversations that people don't want to have, or, we're going to go down a topic that, that's not exciting for most people, but how do we make it enjoyable? How do we make it fun? How do we make it relatable? And so that was an additional skill set. So I'd say, if to people out there that are still trying to find where they're at, look at every opportunity that you have as experience that's putting together puzzle pieces of who you need to become. And that's not a judgment of where you're at, but those are opportunities to incorporate it later. So, although I am not an OBGYN, I'm very thankful for that. I do not want to be delivering babies in the middle of the night. I am able to have time with my family that I want, and cultivate, the skills that I've learned along the way into a career.
Yeah. I think that was an awesome path. And I love that it fed both your desire to be present with your family and also just your entrepreneurial heart. Because that's actually, I agree. That would be my biggest why, as far as why I started the agency. And, my kids were 2 and 3, and I didn't want to do the whole daycare shtick for, long term. And so I rolled the dice on myself. And it's, it's a journey, definitely. So you worked for your company, and I can relate to the whole life insurance push. I worked for a captive type of situation that also had a big emphasis on life insurance. So, how did you get from that company to CLI?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think about it now, and I'm like, every time I say this, I feel like it ages me, and that it's been 2 decades since my independent journey has started. And I just realized that I wanted something more. I wanted something more as an entrepreneur, and I wanted something more as a mom. I had, my first son when I was younger, and then we waited almost 10 years before I had my next child. And I didn't know how to incorporate being a mother again with striving, for a career. And that's why, like I tell you, like the balance thing, there's not a balance, it's a choice, right? So you got to figure out how that works. And where I was at being captive, my boss at the time literally told me, I don't know how you're going to make it if you become a mom. And it was very
Mhm.
discouraging. And instead of it being something that was a known thing about myself and leaning into his thoughts and theories, I was like, well, I'm just going to figure this out and I'm going to make it work. You know, it's a part of like, was that an obstacle? It could have been, right? For me, I looked at it as an opportunity to, first off, build some grit, right? That I'm going to be hardy. I'm going to go and do what I need to do to be able to be an entrepreneur, but also be a mother
Mhm.
again. And fortunately, I have like a really, really awesome husband who is my biggest benefactor in my life. And he, you know, he's like, you can do whatever you need to do. Just let me know. And he's completely supportive and hopeful in that. So I'm very fortunate that I was able
Mhm.
to do that. But I would say, even if he wasn't in my life, I would have done that. I would have built the, you know, the belief that I can move in a different direction and go in that direction. So, you know, it's been over 2 decades since I moved into it. I joined CLI as an agency, and I started in
Mhm.
commercial, and I knew nothing about commercial.
Mhm.
Hartford helped me with their school of business. I had awesome underwriter, Jeanette Diaz, where I could ask all the stupid questions like, what is an EMOD? What's an accord
Mhm.
form? She got me to a point where I really could build commercial. And then I built my agency, and then 2008, I bought CLI. So, you know, it's been a long journey in some ways, and in other ways, I feel like I'm just
Yeah.
beginning, where you're like, oh, those puzzle pieces that we're talking about of coming together with, you've had enough experience, you also have enough experience with knowing who you
Mhm.
are to actually apply those puzzle pieces and put them
Yeah.
together,
Mhm.
right? And seeing the whole picture of what you can do and how, like you said, the word impact, you can impact people and make a
Yeah.
difference. Those puzzle pieces are coming together now for me, and I can see a very clear picture.
Mhm. And that it's I have one of my favorite sayings is just honoring the journey. Like you can't skip pieces, right? Like you have to wait until one puzzle piece is formed and then the next one, and it's a
Mhm.
journey and a process, and like you have to then become the next person that could actually be able to handle, like when you started building your agency from when you bought CLI, you know, who Dawnyel was when she started her agency is different than who Dawnyel was and needed to be when you bought CLI, and you know, grow and expand, but that all takes time. So you um I heard the saying, and it was said, slow success builds character and fast success builds ego. And and I think we've probably both seen both of those, but coming from the real slow train, um, you know, I can see how, like, you know, where my agency is now, you know, I would not have been able, the things that stressed me out when I look backwards and I think about the little things that used to just be so big in my world. And those are the things that in my world right now are not even a blip on my radar. Right. But, and I know in 10 years, I'm going to say the same thing about where I'm sitting now. And you know what I mean? It's just such a journey of like growth and expanding.
Yeah, and you've been able to flex the muscle of an understanding of that you've been here before. You've seen
Mhm.
it. Like it didn't end your world. We have this thing in my office that we joke around when somebody's having difficulty, you know, getting through those moments where we're like, "But did you
Yeah.
die?" And they're like, "Well, no." I'm like, "Okay, you're going to be just fine. Like you're going to be better the next
Yeah.
time too." And it doesn't feel like that in that moment. So that's hard to sit with, I think, when we go in those
Mhm.
moments. I think one of the greatest things I've learned, and I wrote in my recent book that I'm finishing, that about accountability, and I'll own it, is that you have to own that when you go through leadership
Mhm.
changes, is that sometimes there is a grief
Yeah.
cycle, that it really, you have to grieve what you thought it was going to be, because it's stretching you, it's making you look at things differently. Like when you buy a book of business and you come into that and you're like, oh, I wish, you know, I would have done this earlier, or I wish I would have never done this at all. And there's all these things you have to grieve. What is your perceived idea of who you should be at that moment, and what your business or your career should look at that moment, and go, I need to move forward from where I'm truly at right now, and get past all of these things that the would have, should have, could have that are in my
Mm-hmm.
head right now. And that's really hard. I'm like, I know right now, like for me personally, I'm struggling with having, things like a teenager, and going through, that process of it. And my husband told me just the other night, and I'm an open book. I'll tell my whole life to anybody, but that, you gotta, like, what you thought was going to be maybe isn't what is, but you've got to be able to, like, embrace it, realize that you're going through that. When you hide from that, that's when you go into difficulties and you don't grow. And so, but it's easy that we want to go and we go inward and want to hide from those things.
Almost just to get some pressure relief, right? But it's also things that probably compounds problems and stagnates your growth. You gotta gosh, I feel like I'm just full of like sayings right now. But anyway, there's that saying that the funny thing about fear is that when you run towards it, it runs away from you. So that reminds me of is like, just being brave enough to just run at the fear so that it runs away from you instead of hiding, and then it tends to torture you.
It's funny that you say that, because the first thing that came into my head was that when you're heading towards something hard, you don't try and avoid it, you try and run through it, right? That's the first thing. So I think like both of our brains were like of the same wavelength. I'm like, you and I probably have an abundance of book titles in quotes that we
I feel like I do, and I'm every time, so often when I'm talking, I'm like, oh, this quote just popped up, or oh, this analogy that I'm like, oh gosh, I'm probably going to say like the same analogies over and over because it's, it's,
they still hold true. There's nothing wrong with saying statements where it's like, I need that statement because it still holds true, and I need it to help me move forward in a positive direction. And sometimes you may have to say it to yourself like 50 million times, right? And before your brain goes, okay, I believe that.
No, that is true. And that's probably why I have so many things in my head. Okay. So CLI, so you have Canyonlands Insurance, but then you have, which is also, then you have Canyonlands Select, right? So you have agencies, but then you also help agencies with growing and with contracts and things of that nature for those that are not in the insurance industry. She helps other agencies to gain carrier access and a bunch of other fancy tools that are very impressive. And just you use honestly, you use your experience and your education to help impact other agents to grow. And so how many agencies before your Keystone piece, how many agencies had you grown to having underneath, like having as part of your organization?
We grew at 80 agencies across 20 states.
It's pretty impressive. Like that's,
and within the last 5 years, because when you're talking about like, are you ready to take this on? When I bought CLI, I was 32, and of course, when you're 32, you're like, I know everything. Everybody wants all this stuff, and then quickly, I got thrown into an environment where I understood that I had not grown up enough. So I needed to grow as a leader. I needed to understand my agency. I needed to understand acquisitions for not just for myself because I needed to. Plus, '08 brought, the economy changing, and construction was not an awesome niche to be in that time. And so just, pivoting and figuring out, where you needed to be. And it really took a good decade of me cultivating things that I needed to learn, and then really putting together how we could help agencies. So with CLI, like you said, we have resources that we could help them as they grow, not just the carriers, but a lot of it, it ends up being, our team and what they can do. And some of it is that I grew up enough to become what they call Coach D. And then I could actually coach them through stuff. I'm like, okay, I've seen this play before. Okay. And let me tell you, this is what's going to happen. And I'm going to walk you through it. And, you're going to get through this, and I'm going to show you how. But that required some really, really messing up a lot. Like it really did. Like it just gets ugly
Yeah.
sometimes. And like sometimes you don't show up as your best self as a leader
Mhm.
too. And then you have to figure out how to show up as your best self, even if you're having like not a
Yeah.
great day,
Yeah.
right? And so, and then move on if you don't
Yeah.
show up as your
Right.
best self, but being really honest and authentic with your team and going, okay, so I had a moment. And if you show them that you have moments and that you're real about it, then it makes it okay for them to have a
Mm.
moment too. And you can share that together. And that seems like it can be something that you shouldn't do a lot of times in the workplace. But if you lean into the vulnerability
Yeah.
of it, then you actually create a lot of
Mhm.
trust, and you create people that want to be a part of your organization, because they don't feel as stressed out that they feel like they have to be perfect all the time. And I have a tendency, I'm a total perfectionist, which I know you are too, because I know about you, and that we tend to, because we're so hard on
Mhm.
ourselves, that other people feel, especially our children, it seems like, feel like they have to be perfect in order to be accepted,
Right.
right? So like I had to cultivate like, how do I stay true to who I am as a person, but also not wreck everyone around me because I have this tendency of leaning in towards
Yeah.
perfection.
Yeah, I definitely understand, and giving people the space that they need to learn their own lessons and
Hmm.
like honor the process. I know for me, one of the biggest challenges has been, and I've really learned through this. And I think what helped me is the fact that had to learn this way as well. So I think just my own experience helped with it. But with my team, when they're learning lessons, being willing to, not that I ever want them to fail, or I certainly never want to set them up to fail, but knowing that sometimes like the best lessons are the failures that we have, and sometimes allowing my hands to be off enough for them to learn through some failure from time to time. That's hard. Do you know what I mean? That's a
Hmm.
very, very, but it's also like those are also where the best lessons are learned. So like where's that line between stepping in and, you know, taking something over, or, you know, or letting them learn through their failure.
Yeah, it's hard not to be
Yeah.
Mama Bear.
And I definitely, yes, I am definitely mama bear when it comes to my team. So, um, so recently then you had made the decision. Well, talk to me about how everything happened, because what, okay, let me back up. Recently, CLI joined Keystone, which is
Hmm.
another, I mean, essentially they were your competitor before.
Correct. Yeah.
But they were more in the eastern US, and you were more western concentrated. And I remember when you first shared that news, and first I was surprised, which I think that's probably a lot of people were. But second, I was so proud of you, because I felt like as a leader, and I feel like our industry can be so siloed, and so like, this is my territory and this is what I'm doing, and versus seeing like the big picture and like what's in the best interest of the entirety. And so making decisions that really would cause you to have to put like maybe some of your pride or ego aside. I'm sure, anybody would have navigated that. So I was just really impressed with your grittiness and your as a leader to make a hard decision like that. So talk to me a little bit about how that happened, and what were some things that you even navigated. I know before you mentioned almost like a little bit of a grief period after something might not have looked like what you wanted it to. Um, yeah, so just walk us through that new transition.
Yeah, the decision for Keystone and coming together with them really wasn't something I was seeking out. So we were, in year 4 of cultivating what we call the road to 200. The goal with the road to 200 with CLI, the vision that I was casting for our group, was if we had 200 agencies, what kind of services could we bring to them to help them really, exponentially grow their agency, but also just not feel alone. not feeling like they're on an island. And that happens a lot with entrepreneurs, and no one really understands our road of that. Our poor significant others, like we try and throw up on them as much of the stuff we're going through, and they listen and they're loving and they're caring and they may be even in it with us, but they truly don't understand the perspective like another person that is on that road with you. So the goal was to have, 200 of us, on the road, not being finish line, but is if we had 200 agencies, what services could we provide and create this, dream of really going, if they needed risk management services, they needed help with claims navigating, hard claims. Like one of the worst things we can do is take a phone call that one of our team is freaking out because a claim has gone bad. And now you're handing it off to the owner, which we are salespeople generally first, right? And we may be entrepreneurs and leaders, but we are definitely not claims specialists, right? So that's a difficult call for us to navigate and understand and actually create impact. And we may be able to handle it, but what if we had somebody that was actually a specialist? And so like that was something that I was looking at building at the time when I met Keystone. So we had a conversation about what they had already created with their risk management team and specifically with their claims team on taking those escalated claims and helping to navigate them for not just a better experience for the agency owner or their team, but essentially for the people that we serve, for the clients. Like, so, because that's our promise. And so like how can we make sure that we're fulfilling that promise as much as we can? And sometimes it requires to take your ego out of the way. So this whole merger was me taking my ego out of the way. And that was, could I provide that to them in the next couple of years? Because the last couple of years for us have been really hard with claims and with carriers. There's been more frequency within the industry, first and foremost, right? And we've had so many more cat claims than we ever have before. And also, there's been a reduction of the claims talent within the carriers too, because a lot of people retired during 2020. Some of the carriers decided to do early retirements, with their most seniored and, educationally sound claims adjusters. And some of them might even have gone to having outside claims adjusters. So there was all these changes that happened down there, right? So that was one of the things that really keyed me into Keystone and what they have created. And then, they have, placement services, which we have our own placement services for our agencies. If it's something, that they absolutely, do not have the expertise to write and help them. They had that in a different avenue. They've had, they have programs that we could help our agencies with. Employee benefits was something I never wanted to understand or navigate. But I also understand that if you look at a complete client, especially on the commercial line side, it's going to include benefits. And so we already have a large benefits department to help the agencies, and the agencies own that book of business, even if they don't even understand how to do health insurance, right? That only strengthens your retention. That strengthens the value of your book. And when I looked at it overall, was I in a place in my career that I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. Like, I'm going to go and find a group and we're going to do this. But if you drew a map, you would see CLI, like we said, was mainly in the West and Keystone in the East. And by coming together, we could cross over and help more agencies. And that really was the purpose. Is it comes back to, who do we serve? And we serve a couple of people, and the trickling effect goes down to the clients. So, as a network group, we serve our agencies and we help them, like I said, leverage their books. We also help them grow exponentially. We also create community, which is really important, so we don't feel alone. And then we also serve our carriers. So that was something like in my journey of like, I need to learn more about, what is important to our carriers, and then across the nation, especially when I was decided that I was going to take CLI and start growing it in other states, is that by having the experience over the last 17 years of being on carrier councils, is it gave me an understanding of what our partner carriers look like. And, so like when agencies come to us, like, you're not guaranteed a code. You have to be a good partner to those carriers, right? And you have to make sure that you're, taking care of the clients that you're serving as well. So like there are certain characteristics we look for in an agency that would be a good partner for us with CLI. And the characteristics that Keystone was looking for their type of agencies were very similar. You could take and look at a vetting form of what they had of the type of agencies, like behaviorally of how they looked, and they would match up with CLI. And that was important to us, that we were serving the type of agencies that were a fit and that they were a fit on both sides.
And it is so important, and it's amazing how different it can all be. And I really think, vetting for the quality of an agency is a really, really, really big deal. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's exciting because we're going through a hard market right now. We've never seen anything like that,
No.
right? We can now take some tools we didn't have before and go, look, okay, we can help you in a different, impactful way, and have it be that. So in that process, I am no longer the single person in charge.
Yeah.
And that's really different, right? I still own my book of business, which is like our placement services for our agencies on the commercial line side. I sold off my personal lines book, so I specialize in commercial for my book of business. So I am very relatable to my agencies because I'm going through it as well, and I understand it. But I also, want to make sure that, they're taken care of. And it's one of those things when I look at it and I think about like the grief cycle that we talked about, right? And for me was I had to put away a little part of my ego and saying that I needed to be in charge. I needed to be the person that made the decisions. And I needed to say that it was okay to do it collaboratively, do it together with other people. And it was harder than you would think it would be.
I really understand that. I think part of it might come from, you started scratch your book. Same.
Yep.
And I remember when I was in, and then I'm going to take like a little segue and I'll pull these pieces together. But I remember when I was running a nonprofit years ago, and the woman who kind of stepped down so me and one of my close girlfriends could take over this nonprofit. She had kind of just burnt out, and new fresh leadership needed to come in. And she would have some of the strangest, most controlling, odd behaviors that just were not a good look. And I remember I ran into somebody, maybe it was like a therapist even, and they were like, have you ever heard of founder syndrome? And if you haven't, look it up sometime. But basically, it's just like the person that started it, right? The person like coming from building from scratch, and which she started this nonprofit, and the difficulty in letting go and the emotions that are associated with it, and it's actually called founder syndrome, and it would make it makes complete sense to me why it's just the process of letting go, and you're not the one casting like the ultimate vision, but it also means like as long as you're aligned with somebody that where you trust them to cast the vision, and you are in a position where you can still impact the decision making to a degree. But yeah, I would struggle too.
Yeah. And that was part of the important thing with merging with Keystone, is that I said I wanted a seat at the table. I wanted to be part of leadership so I could make sure that the people that, have come with me so far, that I had an opportunity to, cast a vision, voice, their voices. And that was really important to me. So I do have that seat on it. So that helps a lot with that. I think people don't realize how much identity you have maybe within that founder syndrome that you're talking about, because I'm not that. And then it's all of the perceptions that get thrown at you within our social life. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you sold out. I'm like, no, I'm doing something better for my agencies, and I'm not selling it. That's not what this is. And it it needed to happen for them. They needed that help. And for me, I needed to I was okay with taking a step, you know, away from being the head leader of something to be the leader that they needed now, which didn't need for me to be the person that was the only person at the top of the pyramid,
Mhm.
right? But it's a very interesting thing to navigate that now going into it, I think in any leadership change that I make, it'll give me an awareness I didn't have
Yeah.
before, that I need to really be mindful of some of the things that I may be
Mm.
feeling and that I've seen before. And again, you're flexing that grit muscle and you know where that looks like. So, it definitely, you know, helped me with that leadership skill for me.
Well, I mean, I think it's a sign of a very strong leader when you're willing to make the decisions. It's a character revealing decision making, which in a very good way.
Thank you.
So, different topic. Let's talk about so you have 1.5 books. Well, actually two, but we're just, making last minute tweaks on the second one. So I know the first one, which is just such a you title, and I absolutely love it. But the first one is Don't Project Your Shit on Me. And then I believe the second one is I'll Own It.
Yep, you got it.
And I know you're finishing on well, for sure the cover. You're working. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I gave you guys the proof of it, and said it needed some
Yeah.
help. I won't go into what I thought of it with you guys. You know what I
Just a
said.
little, it's just a little finishing touch.
It needs
Yeah.
some tweaks.
And so I think one of the things that I've always noticed about you since I first met you was like you've done such a great job in be in like as women in insurance because I like you're definitely you're feminine, you're a female, you're super gritty and strong. You are definitely like lean into your education coaching, but the thing that I love about the titles in this book, and you can kind of just tell what they are just by the titles, is like you are super like you are very strong in your character and in your mindset, and that you are really big about accountability. And so share with us a little bit
Mhm.
about what your two books, and I know there was some like really cool inspiration behind both of them.
Yeah. So the Don't Project Your Shit on Me, that was not the first book I probably felt comfortable putting out there first, but my editor was really great. She pushed me to say, I think this is the book you need to do first, even though my dad's like, you're using shit in the title. So it goes to that perfectionist good girl thing that I'm like, okay, I am going to put this out here. And that book was really about realizing when you're projecting things onto other people, when they're projecting it onto you, how to handle that. But most importantly, we project the most stuff on
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. And how do you deal with all that messiness? So I wanted to create a book that was easy to read, really fun, and just some concepts of you know, everybody has stuff going on that we're dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you can either deal with it in an effective way or ineffective way. So that book was all about, giving examples of, how you've ineffectively done it. And then here are some tools that I've used along the way that have helped, or I've seen other people use too. So it was a fun book to put out. This book has been a longer journey. It started with, I started writing a book about workplace accountability. My oldest son was in high school, and he was just having a harder time, with schoolwork, and he wasn't being honest about it. And he's like a really good kid, right? So that drove me crazy because, I just wanted him to be honest, and I wanted him to own it. And here I am, working on a book that's about workplace accountability, and I can't get my son to be honest about his work. And so I turned it into a journey for him and I through his high school years and part of his adult life, in that we created the framework and the pillars of I'll Own
Mm-hmm.
It. And each of the letters in I'll Own It stand for a pillar of accountability that we both decided were important to us. And so we have integrity, leadership, liability, open-mindedness, work, no excuses, initiative, and truth. And those are the pillars that we worked upon and we talked about every Tuesday. We then handed out bands that look like this one here to individuals. And then we did it actually in bulk and sometimes with groups as we were talking about it. We had little cards that we would talk to people about it. So I share a bit of that journey with him. But what it did from there is that I started using those pillars in my personal and professional life. And then I started doing a lot more research about it. I got caught up in about 6 years of research of, what does it really mean to have integrity? How do people show up in integrity? Like really getting deep into each of the pillars and really understanding, what that meant. And the cool part is sometimes, like even last night, I was going over final layout, which I told you I was finishing. I'm working on right now. So it's really close. And looking at some of the chapters, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to read this chapter again because I need to work on this pillar right now. And it will just strike you at different times of where your level of owning it is showing up professionally and personally. And so I share stories of, of experiences that I've been through, other people that have shared their experiences. I also talk about, some of the scientific research behind it. I don't go too deep. I didn't get too nerdy in it, but deep enough to have an understanding of, it's like, why do we do some of the things that we do? Like initiative. Why don't we take initiative on something? Right. And then we feel bad about it, right? Because we didn't take initiative. Or sometimes you shouldn't take initiative. And really it was interesting because I have liability as one of the pillars. And I got to really how does liability and what we do for risk management in our industry really intersect with how we manage risk in our personal and professional lives? And that was fun too. I probably went way too deep on that one when I was reading that chapter. I was like, there was lots of research in there because it kind of cross-sectored with, what I do. And it really, it's very healing for me to go through it and be able to, see the journey that I took during that time period. Because we're talking about this is almost a decade of working on this book. So and honestly, it's hard to put out a book. It's hard to say that this product is where you want it to be. And especially if it's very, very vulnerable. So it's, and you're a perfectionist, like I mentioned, so it's never good enough, right? So then that comes, give yourself some grace. If you helped one person with one concept in your book, you've done what you needed to do. And that's it. Keep it really small. I think if you're afraid to go and do something big, keep it really small and have it be okay if it's just that.
Well, I know writing a book for me is on my bucket list.
Oh, I'll help you with that.
Not this year, that's for sure. So one of my beliefs is that success is built on failure. I feel like I'm really, I can't say I'm the queen of it, but I'm definitely some type of royalty of learning lessons the hard way. And so what is your favorite failure?
My favorite failure. Okay, there's a lot. I think my favorite failure is probably my first book of business that I bought. Why is that? I did not know what I didn't know. And I did the deal on a napkin.
I love this. It's great.
And then we had a contract after that. It was done pretty quickly, and I jumped in there just total feet first. Went in there, had a book that basically the average age was in their mid 70s. Bought a lot of sympathy cards, lost a lot of clients. Homes were mobile homes. There was so much, if you could go make a checklist of, you need to make sure you check this in a book. You make sure you need to check this in a book. You need to make sure you check this in a book. Dawnyel didn't take any of those. Now I can take that failure, and I've bought books since then and done acquisitions that I can go to agencies and I'm like, don't do this. First, don't do a napkin. I mean, it was trustworthy. It was a good book of business. there was just certain specifics that if I would have known that I was going to buy a book
Mhm.
of business at that part of my career, I probably would have interviewed a whole bunch of people. I would say don't interview too many that you become completely neurotic
Yeah.
about it and freaked out, right? Because then that will keep you from actually taking
Yeah.
that risk. But I would say get with the biggest aha moments, positive and negative, from somebody that has done acquisition. Don't let them linger on the negative too
Mhm.
much, but do watch out for some of the negatives because acquisitions can help you grow a ton within your agency, but also as a
Yeah.
leader too. And then walking in there, I wish I would have known earlier in my acquisitions to, if there was a team that was part of that acquisition, is to come in and tell them, don't say, hey, nothing's going to change, right?
Mhm.
But just let them know that, there's going to be some changes. We're going to try and lessen the impact, and we're going to be transparent of the things that might change along
Yeah.
the way. But your success in the agency will be adapting to these changes. If you have any concerns or questions, please ask. Don't keep it within and create the stress bubble inside of
Mhm.
yourself. We want to make sure there's transparency and clarity. I wish I would have gone in like that on every acquisition I would have done, because I feel like I possibly lost some talent because I did not communicate
Yeah.
properly to them what that was going to look like for them, because it's scary, it's fearful, and I just went
Mm.
through it. So I now know exactly how they
Yeah.
feel. And it gives me a bigger and better
Yeah.
picture of that. But yeah, that's definitely my biggest failure, but it's also one of the biggest things that it helped me take
Yeah.
risks too,
And know
because I
that you can
learned.
recover from it and that you're gonna, like,
Oh
learn
yeah,
from it and pull those forward, and so you still win.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, my first, book of business that I bought, I did not realize it was mostly a paper agency, and so,
Hmm.
there was, a lack of ability to do a lot of the reporting that I would have wanted, and so I was surprised that we had a very large amount of home health cares, and and it was funny because I was like, "This doesn't make these businesses aren't they're, like, not real businesses," and I kept like, it was just strange,
Hmm.
they were really strange to me, and, and guess what? After 2020, they were actually all busted because
Hmm.
they were, conning money out of, there was a Feeding Your Future. It was a fund that was created during COVID to,
Hmm.
like, feed a bunch of the youth that are in the inner cities and, like, that type of thing, so these home health cares were all, like, in cahoots together, um, like, defrauding the government of it was, like, $250 million it ended up being. Yeah,
Oh
and
my
I would
gosh.
say, at the count that we're at right now, about 20 of those home health cares were in that whole ring. So they were real businesses.
Yeah.
My senses were right. I couldn't figure it out at that moment. So
Yeah. I think with your failures is listen to your gut more. I think that's one of the big overall
yeah.
failures is on like, yeah, people say your gut and like that doesn't, resonate or it's not that
Mhm.
important. But like if you have that feeling, just go in there and not avoid it, but explore it a
Yeah.
little bit and figure out like, okay, what would it take to ease this gut feeling and give me an understanding that yes, this is what I want to
Mhm.
do. And that's okay. Because like we tend to ignore it and we hear about it, as you know, older people like you should listen to your gut. Like it's never wrong. But what does that really mean? Like what when they say listen to your gut, what
Yeah.
does that mean? And it means digging a little deeper, check it
Mhm.
out until you feel like that feeling has been subsided or that it has been
Yeah.
affirmed.
Yeah. For me, I practice a pause because I'll confuse myself sometimes. 'Cause I'll be like, is this my intuition or is this something that's just like freaking me out? And sometimes
Yeah.
it's hard to decipher them, but if you just
Mhm.
pause, then usually, Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than you want it to for the pause, but usually the right answer rises to the surface and then you can decision make off of it. But yeah, I just have to pause. I tend to make like really fast decisions though, so I need to slow my roll sometimes anyway. So the pause it's a good thing for me. It probably keeps my whole family intact.
It doesn't feel good at the time, though. I hate losing momentum. I'm like, why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah,
And then, but if I keep rolling with it, then it
it is
compounds.
so true. It is so true. Well, in closing, one of my favorite questions is just keys to success. So little daily success habits, or just some of the staples that you feel like are keys that have really lended to getting you where you are today.
First and foremost, I would say embrace who you are and where you're at. I would say also time management, really understanding how to effectively manage your time so it's efficient. I would say know your KPIs and know if your KPIs actually contain true data or just the data you are trying to get it
Mm-hmm.
to. Because there's been a lot of times where I'm like, I'm going to measure this, this, and this. And then it looks awesome. And then I was like, oh, I should have measured retention like in there too, like, or something, that's off ball. Like I should have included this data set in there. So you can measure KPIs, but you could be measuring the wrong things within those
Mm-hmm.
KPIs too. So just be aware of that, of where you're really going. I would say become the ultimate problem solver,
I
and that there is their life is not like easy to navigate, and there things are going to get really mucky and dirty and grimy, and you're going to have to go and okay, I'm going to have to get my hands dirty and I'm going to have to then clean up afterwards, but it's going to be okay because I've gone down this path before. And I think really don't be afraid to, like I said, become the ultimate problem solver. When somebody comes to you as something, don't take it as like, oh my gosh, like this is awful, the world is ending, like going down this rabbit hole of it. It's just like, okay, give me your problem. Become the person that is that person that you're saying, it's okay, give me your problem. What does it look like? And how do we
Mm-hmm.
navigate this? And but sometimes don't let other people's problems
Yeah.
become yours. And so that's the hardest thing to navigate, is like, that's the projecting
Yeah.
part of it. So you can go, hey, give me two solutions on this, and then throw it back to them and have a conversation about it and navigate it. But I don't mind somebody throwing me their problem. I just don't want to keep it. Like if it's not my problem, I don't want to have ownership of it. I want to collaborate in regards to it, and find a fun way to navigate that problem if
Yeah.
we can, and not try to take it personally. I feel like when I've had problems arise and I haven't navigated it with the mindset of being the ultimate problem
Mhm.
solver, then that problem was harder to
Yeah.
solve.
Yeah. We talk about this so often in our agency as be solution centers. So like I would say the
Mm-hmm.
easiest thing in the world is to identify the problem. Like what's wrong? Okay. Anybody and everybody can do that. But if we start actually taking it to the next step and being like, okay, what can we actually do about this? And you're taking like action forward. And it's like the best thing you can do is anytime you're in a problem is just like starting some type of momentum forward to solve it and get onto the other side of it rather than just sitting in spin cycle on your problem because you identified something and you're going to sit and ruminate on it and chew it to death.
Yeah, I'll go back to a quote that I tell my team all the time, which is do, and then comma, do not deliberate.
Oh, that is good. That,
Because it's really short. You can
yeah.
remember it. And then, like, are you stuck in the problem? Are you, deliberating on
Mhm.
it? Or are you doing something about it? Like, you just got to decide which side that
Yeah.
you're on. And then also, like, I've had Patrick Kinney. I've worked with him with Travelers. I've now working with him with Keystone. And he always say, attack the problem, not the
Yes.
person. So like recognize, that you're doing what you're doing in regards to problem
Yeah.
solving. So like I always think that's really important when you're looking at problem solving. If you decide that you're going to attack the person, I don't think it's going to
Yeah.
go very well. It's one of
Nope.
those things.
Usually doesn't. Doesn't at all. Yes. I would
No.
agree. Well, Dawnyel, thank you for joining me. I could talk to you all day long. For more information on Dawnyel, we're going to have all of her information posted in show notes. So if you'd like to connect with her or learn a little bit more about CLI or Canyonlands or Keystone, you can find more information there.
Well, thanks, my friend.
Thank you.